Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. One of the things that I did in law school was I was the managing editor of the St. Louis University Public Law Review. And that was a fun job to have. I got to see all the articles, but I also got to write an article, and I had an article published, and it was called How to Solve the Troubling Problem of Attorney Misappropriation. Because even in 1993, when I graduated from law school, the problem of attorneys stealing from clients was still a pretty big problem. It was published in the Law Review, and I felt very smart, but then I got a lot of feedback from people telling me, that'll never work. And I thought, well, maybe that's right, but don't you think somebody ought to try? I mean, some of what I advocated for, mentors, auditors, rehabilitation, programs in the bar meant to interdict this as early as possible and to rehabilitate people if it was possible. They were implemented in certain states, and some of them have worked well, some of them have not worked particularly well. And yet, every month it seems we're tethered to another case of a lawyer who is stealing from his clients. I never thought this was one of those things that I would ever see because I felt like I worked with people who were really good people. But in some respects, I can empathize with the guy who spent 4 years in college, 3 years in law school, 2 years practicing law, and he still can't make ends meet. Sometimes you can't even make the ends wave at one another. I was that guy at one point in my career. I ate a lot of ramen noodles. When it was obvious to me that I could not make it in private practice on my own, I went into government service because the last thing I needed was the temptation of somebody else's money in my trust account. Early on in my career, I met a guy I'll call Dave. Now, Dave was a super environmental lawyer, and he asked me to help him appeal a number of different nuisance cases involving agricultural nuisances. We won some. We lost a big one at the 7th Circuit up in Illinois. But it was one of those things. Everybody who does plaintiff's law understands that you win some and you lose some. So you budget for that. And he had a nice office in a Midwest city. He had a great staff. And it never once occurred to me that this might be the kind of guy who would ever have financial trouble. Because he was such a great lawyer and such a great person. He was one of those people that I think has been described as somebody you could sit down and have a beer with. He was that kind of guy, down to earth, didn't come off as a stuffy lawyer. And I liked that about him, because I like to think I don't come off like a stuffy lawyer. But in spite of not acting or looking like he was having financial problems, he was. One day he called and asked me to represent him in a bar complaint and to oppose a subpoena for his trust account. I was perplexed. I said, well, you're not in trouble, are you? And sheepishly, he admitted that, yeah, they probably would show some things that he wasn't real proud of. So I told him that within the bounds of the law, I would draft a response to the subpoena and I'd see if we could get it suppressed, but I wouldn't promise anything, and so I set to work on it. That was on, I think, a Friday, or it might have been a Thursday evening. Monday morning, I got a call from his paralegal telling me that he no longer needed my help. And I said, well, that's great. And he said, no, you don't understand. Dave has passed away. He had a massive heart attack, and he passed away over the weekend. That was a tragedy because, like I said, I really loved the guy. He was a terrific person. But you know what? He left owing thousands of dollars to clients. I was just gobsmacked by that because it wasn't the Dave that I knew. But I understand how it happens. Like I said, lawyer has to make a payroll. He has to pay the 3 or 4 people who are as close to him in some respects as family. And this month there isn't enough money in the operating account to do that. So what does he do? Well, there's plenty in the trust account, and nobody's really going to miss $376.20, which is what it would take to avoid an overdraft. So we'll do a little switcheroo. We'll make a couple of entries into the records here to cover that. And pretty soon, that number is now in the thousands, and you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. I have empathy, but no sympathy. Right is right, wrong is wrong, and it would be far better to hand over all your clients to another lawyer and declare bankruptcy than it would be to steal from your clients. So very few people take that path. With that little bit of history out of the way, we can talk about today's case. Now, one of my favorite TV shows from the 1980s and 1990s was America's Most Wanted. I thought it did a pretty good job of helping law enforcement bring fugitives to justice. I really liked John Walsh, and I thought how he turned a life-changing tragedy into a cause was a good thing. So today, we have Florida's Most Wanted lawyer. His name is John Spencer Jenkins. Now, the middle name, Spencer, comes from Middle English, and it's an occupational name for someone who dispensed provisions or money. Dispense, yeah, you get the idea. Normally, when you think of someone who dispenses money or provisions, we tend to think of someone dispensing them to someone else. But John Spencer Jenkins, an attorney in Florida, took a whole different approach to the whole dispensing thing. He dispensed the assets of a probate estate to himself. At least those are the allegations that were proved in the discipline case, and I believe are factually correct. He hasn't been convicted of any criminal act at this point, and he's innocent until proved guilty. Just so we're clear for the record. Now, Jenkins was hired to assist in the distribution of an uncontested estate. The personal representative was unable to reach Jenkins after funds were deposited into the trust account. In this same estate matter, Jenkins received several deposits into his trust account totaling $637,813.75. However, these funds were depleted with no evidence that the funds were withdrawn for the benefit of the estate. Jenkins did not participate in barred disciplinary proceedings, and a default judgment was entered. Here's what the referee reported. So here are the relevant dates. On January 4, 2024, the Florida Bar filed its petition for an emergency suspension, and that's basically to make sure he can't practice until this issue is resolved. Supreme Court suspended him on January 9th. On January 31, the Florida Bar filed a motion for default against the respondent because he had not responded to any of the things that they had put out there for him. A properly noticed case management conference took place on February 5th. On February 14th, the hearing on the default motion was heard. He failed to appear. The default order was granted by order on February 15th. On March 15th, the final hearing was conducted. Bar counsel appeared, respondent did not. And then all this stuff was noticed to his email and regular mailing addresses, and of course, he didn't show up. All of the properly filed pleadings, recorded testimony, and exhibits constitute the record in the case. And here are what the narrative summary of the case is. The respondent is currently suspended. The respondent acted as an attorney for Larry Corbin. Corbin had been unable to contact him since June, so it took basically 6 months for the bar to get this thing going. It was an uncontested estate with $643,399.35 to be distributed. So they employed an auditor, the lead auditor of the Florida Bar, to look at the operating and trust accounts. His findings were admitted into evidence. And we can go through all of this if we need to, but we really don't need to, because at the end of the day, on January 16, 2024, respondents' bank accounts were frozen. At that time, the trust account had a balance of $93.16 in it, and the Florida Bar determined that he had misappropriated $612,507 in client funds. Now, it would be really nice if the Florida authorities could put this guy under oath and ask him what he did with all that money. But to do that, they'd have to be able to talk to him. And to be able to talk to him, they'd have to be able to find him. And they can't seem to do that either. No matter where they look, they can't seem to find Jenkins. He disappeared in March of 2024 before the final disciplinary hearing. Now, not a whole lot is known about Jenkins. He apparently attended Texas State University, graduating in 1995 with a fine arts degree. and then he went to the New England School of Law and graduated in 2006. The 8-year gap between 1995 and 2003 is unexplained in the public record. He was admitted to the New York Bar and Connecticut Bar in 2007, and in 2012 he came down to Florida. Now, if you called the old boys' phones, they'd give you disconnect messages like they did the Miami Herald. And his office on Southeast 7th Street in Fort Lauderdale is shuttered. His corporate status as a professional limited liability company was revoked for failure to file an annual report. So where is he? Well, one database used by the Miami Herald tracked him to Philadelphia, but it doesn't appear that he's in Philadelphia either. Now, the embezzlement or theft, or alleged theft, I guess would be the way to put that, of over $600,000 is grand theft, and it's a felony, and it's an extraditable offense. I can't believe there's not a felony warrant out there for him at this point, but a check of the FDLE wanted persons list did not show him on it. Still, it would not surprise me if he had changed his name, adopted an alias, changed his appearance, and was working almost anywhere except in the practice of law. Now, in some respects, remaining on the lam from the law presents both unique opportunities and unique challenges for Jenkins. He knows the law, he understands the basics of jurisdiction, and thus understands that if there is indeed a warrant out for him, that if he's caught in some other jurisdiction, he could fight extradition. He also likely knows that is rarely effective. He is surely aware that flight tends to implicate guilt, and that by fleeing, he's already pretty much admitted that he's done something wrong. And that's essentially what Donna Adelson did when she fled. If he essentially was successful in pulling a Donna Adelson, because as you'll recall, she blabbed about it on the phone and the feds nabbed her at the airport, they haven't gotten this guy. It's likely because he didn't talk about it before he took flight. Given that the bar and its auditors discovered the crime, law enforcement probably wasn't involved until long after his disbarment, meaning that he's had a fairly nice long head start to go on the run. Now, with his legal knowledge, that may help him in that he knows how most fugitives are caught, traffic stops, bad checks, credit checks, that sort of thing. He also knows that anything in the legal area is probably out of bounds for employment, as that would be the first place law enforcement would look for him. And he knows that he can't use his own name and own social security number to apply for jobs, because that will show up in databases and that will lead law enforcement to him. He won't be able to open a bank account under his own name. He's not going to be able to carry around $600,000 in a billfold. It's going to be a huge problem for him. He may have money to spend, but given his lifestyle, he probably will burn through that in a year or so, maybe less. He will at some point have to get a job, which means he has to use a social security number. And as we found out from our case just a few weeks ago, we know the Social Security Administration doesn't like it when you don't play nice with your own social security number. Adding to these problems, he's probably now on the radar of at least 2 federal agencies. The FBI is responsible for tracking down people who have engaged in interstate flight to avoid prosecution. And as a fugitive, the U.S. Marshals Task Force is going to have his name, picture, and ID too. Unless he's busted in one of the no-bail jurisdictions, any interaction with law enforcement where he winds up in handcuffs is going to be the first step on a long road to a likely prison sentence, assuming that he's guilty, and again, keep in mind he's innocent until he's proved guilty. Now, he's lived and practiced in New York, Connecticut, and Florida, and he's not in Florida. He went to school in Texas and Massachusetts. He could be in any of these states, or really anywhere. He might have even fled the country. While he might be more comfortable where he's more familiar, there is a big risk that someone will recognize him in any of those places. But every lawyer knows that with but a few notable exceptions, sooner or later the law gets its man. If John Spencer Jenkins were asking me for help, I'd tell him to turn himself in, get a good lawyer, and return whatever amount of money you have on you. It's better to go to court with something paid back than to incur additional wrath by making the money unrecoverable. Well, these are the recent photos of Jenkins. If you've seen this guy, you should probably call the Florida Bar, or you could call the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Tallahassee. That number is 850-410-7000. This is one of those things that's sad, and at the same time, as a member of the bar, I feel it's very important for us to stand up and point this guy out and get him brought to justice, because you don't steal from your clients. You have to treat them with an honor most sensitive. And unfortunately, that's not allegedly what John Spencer Jenkins did. And the Florida bar found him to be guilty of misappropriation, and they permanently disbarred him, which means he will never be a lawyer in Florida ever again, and likely he won't be a lawyer anywhere else. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff we ask you to do. You can email me at the address above if you have any questions you want to address off of the radar. And again, if you have the opportunity to do something nice for someone today, and it could be anything, just anything that makes somebody else's life a little bit better. Then, when you're done doing that, come on back down here to the beach, catch me down here, and we'll talk about something else interesting.
If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.